Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you. So I know this is a weird time with people not sure if they should be stepping outside of their comfort zones, so I'm glad to see you live, and if people are live streaming, we're happy to have them on board too. People who are live streaming, if you have questions, we have somebody monitoring that, so hopefully I'll be able to address any questions that you have. My name is Marie Gallo Lethcoe. I currently am an assistant principal at Father Lopez Catholic High School in Daytona. I used to work here 100 years ago, 14 years ago actually, for a very long time. And it's always such a pleasure coming back. This is the parish in which I was married and the parish that my daughter was baptized in. And it's always such a blessing to be back here in this beautiful space. So thank you for having me. So we are going to start a 4-week series on world religions. Obviously, 4 weeks, we're not even denting the topic in any substantial way. So what we're going to do, it's very much just a survey. And the intention behind it is to really kind of get us to a place where we have a sense of how similar we are, how very much our traditions are with one another. So I am not a world religions expert by any means. I guess an expert is the person who knows the most in the room. I do have a master's degree in theology and have taught world religions on a high school level. If there's anything that you can contribute that you have a familiarity with, I would love to hear it. And if there's something that we don't know together, I will find out for us. So that's kind of how we're going to proceed. There's my friends, the Bonds, first people I ever met when I came to Daytona Beach. So with that, we'll begin with prayer. We're going to do a mantra that I like to do just to kind of center us. And so I would invite you to repeat after me from one of our beautiful psalms. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Lord God, we raise up tonight for your honor and glory. Ask that you bless our time together and help me speak your words. In your name, amen. Thank you. Okay. So this is our proposed schedule. Obviously, as I said, we can only kind of scratch the surface here. So the religions that we're going to spend some time on are going to be Judaism, Islam, and then we're going to look at some Eastern religions, Hinduism, and Buddhism. 3 years ago at this time, we were actually doing this course of study. It was a little bit different focused. And my husband fell ill, and I had to stop the class. And so if you happen to be at that, where I see a couple familiar faces who might have been at that, hello, how are you? This might be a review for you, but 3 years is a long time, as I said to somebody. You can forget a lot in 3 years. I can forget a lot in 3 hours. So hopefully it's not redundant. We didn't really get through, I don't even think we finished getting through Islam when we had to cease and desist with the class. So tonight, though, we did get through Judaism. So, but what I want to do before we even actually get there is I'd like to talk about this concept of religion versus spirituality. And I'd like to invite some conversation around what do you consider religion, and then what do you consider spirituality? Are they the same? Are they different? What does that bring to mind in your head when you hear these two words?
Religion is institutionalized, spirituality is what you are, or what you believe, whether you go to a church or not.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat everything you guys say because there are people live streamed, right? So religion is institutionalized, and spirituality is everything that you are, whether you have a religion or not. Okay? Anybody want to add to that? Yes?
I'd say that religion is community, and spirituality is more individual.
Religion is community, and spirituality is more individual. Okay? Anyone else? Yes?
I really see them as interconnected because I know that my spirituality is very much based on my Catholic faith.
Okay, so you see them interconnected because your spirituality is very much centered on your Catholic faith.
But I know that's not true for everyone because you hear a lot of people that will say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual.
Okay, so and she's saying it's not true for everybody because you hear people say who I'm not religious but I am spiritual. So let's take that one step further. What does it mean to be religious and what does it mean to be spiritual? So if one says I'm not or I am religious, so what does that mean to be religious? Going to church, following the rules of the church.
Yeah, the precepts of the
Precepts of a particular church that you're attending. Okay? Okay. And then what would it mean to say, but I am spiritual?
It's more of an individual thing. People say that I don't need to belong to any church. I have my own spirituality.
Okay.
They're against organized religion and this.
Okay. So people who say, I don't need a church, I have my own spirituality, sometimes they are against an organized religion. Okay. Are you guys comfortable with kind of where we have this at this point? Okay. So let's look at this slide I have up here. I was looking around for something that might represent this well. I'm okay with this. I'm not 100% sold on it. I didn't write it. I stole it from, so I can't complain too much if I stole it from someone. But this is the way that they do their Venn diagram. So they say the religion is practices, rites, or rituals, and somebody's deciding which rituals, which rites am I going to follow, what is right or wrong, and what is true and false. Spirituality, where do I find meaning? How do I feel connected? How should I live? And then the middle intersection says that these things are spirituality and religion. So belief, comfort, reflection, ethics, and awe. Kathy. Okay, so I'm a good person, don't pin me down. Okay? So may I ask, and you don't have to answer, I do this to my kids all the time, I'm like, you don't have to answer this, but I'm going to stare at you until you do. So may I ask, do you think that religion is, I don't know if I want to ask you this. I'm asking maybe for a judgment. Is religion more important than spirituality, or is it better, or it's just different? When you said it's like spirituality is like, don't pin me down. Yeah. Okay, so she's saying the religion gives you guidance that feeds your spiritual life. Okay. So here's what I would suggest to you. Religion is, in fact, an organized, institutional group of people that have decided that there are specific guidelines, tenets, rituals, ways of talking about God that they are comfortable with, and therefore they belong to this organized group. That religion is, in fact, made by people based on something that matters to them most. Spirituality is a relationship with the other. A relationship with the other. So when I say the other, I'm being very, 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 very generic. Because when I say the other in this particular case, I'm talking about something bigger than me, not the other person necessarily, but what is it that I believe is bigger than me and controls the universe. Now, the other looks different depending on if you believe in a religious tradition or if you don't believe in a religious tradition, right? But if people who say, I'm spiritual, you have to then make some assumptions about them that would be that they believe there is something outside of themselves larger than them. Now, it might be the ocean, right? I go to the ocean, and when I go to the ocean, I commune with nature, and when I commune with nature, this is my spiritual expression, but it is bigger than I am, right? Or it might be God. So this idea of spirituality is that I recognize there is something outside of me, and I have some need to commune with whatever that is that's outside of me. And then religion says we have an organized way to show you what the other is, how to commune with the other, and we do this in community with people who have the same tenets and beliefs as you do. You like that? You don't like that? You debate that? You're making faces at me?
To a point.
Go ahead.
To a point. I agree with you. Simplicity.
To a point. So what point, where do you deviate?
When we get into stage 2 of religion, I'm sorry, I'm running a book club with
Okay.
Faith After Doubt.
Okay, Faith After Doubt book club, and?
And, what is right and wrong, that's simplistic thinking. And within our religion, we start doubting some of the simplistic stuff that we were taught. And we are not going to throw away our whole faith, but we're going to start asking questions and picking and choosing even within there.
So you're talking about when we get to our faith development stage 2, because we all move through phases of faith development. And so then when we reach a certain phase of our faith development, we begin to pick and choose what we like about a religion?
Correct.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's part of faith development. That's part of human development. We do it with our parents, right? And we also do it with churches and religions. Yes. Okay.
And spirituality can be separate from, our religion gives us maybe a basis, but we develop our own spirituality.
We can develop our own spirituality. Some people never do. Some people are very religious, but they are not, they are ritualistic in their religious practice. They are not necessarily communing with this big, huge idea. They're like, I believe there's a God. I believe if I practice these rituals that I will do that. But they're not like kind of out in this realm of no, that's not fair to say. I want to be careful how I say this. Kind of out in that realm of like this vastness. They're like, it can be, this is where God is. We're here now with God because this is the church. So there can be religious people like that.
There is.
Okay. Yes. So, but so, but I agree with you. We develop a spirituality, and what I heard some of you say is that spirituality is developed because of a religion. Some people would say my spirituality is developed in spite of a religion, right? And some people would say I've never been religious, but I commune with the other in a way that feeds me, and that's good. Okay? So why am I having this conversation? Any idea? Didn't know you had to come here and think and answer questions, did you? What's this conversation for?
Maybe there's some religions that are spiritual, that are more focused on the individual.
Okay. Some religions that are more focused on individual.
Yeah, I think spirituality is across all religions.
Excellent.
It's not based on one set of rules.
Okay, so spirituality is going to touch every religious tradition in some way. And spirituality is, I am going to give you an opinion. I'm going to say this, and I'm owning it. This is Marie's opinion. Spirituality, our spiritual life is often bigger than religion. Okay? And the reason I say that is because I am so convinced that I want to think of religions in terms of teams. So let's think about religions in terms of teams. I'm on Team Catholic, and I am happy to be on Team Catholic because I think Catholicism is so beautiful. I think it's so rich, and I think it gives me a way to live my life and express my beliefs in God and humanity in such a healthy way that I love being on Team Catholic. And I wouldn't be on Team Catholic if I didn't think Team Catholic was really the way to go, right? But there are a lot of people on Team Islam, and there's a lot of people on Team Judaism. And they believe what I believe about their religion, okay? But that doesn't mean that because I'm on Team Catholic that I cannot embrace the beauty found on the other teams and recognize the wholeness that we all bring to this important picture, which is relationship with God and with other. And so my spirituality is deeply enriched by understanding other religious traditions. Does that make sense? So, and truthfully, what I'm saying to you is written in a church document, okay? It's written in a Catholic church document called Nostra Aetate. And basically, I know that this is hard to read, and I'm not going to read it to you, but basically what this says is that the Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in other religious traditions. That we recognize that other great religious traditions have something to share with us and have something to teach us. And as long as these truths, and I'm using a capital T, the big truths, are evident that these are substantial pathways to God. Okay? But ultimately, what the church says is we're Team Catholic. And we have the best way, but not the only way. Right? Which only makes sense because why would Team Catholic not say that about Team Catholic? That would be like saying, I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, but only if I like what the Pittsburgh Pirates are doing that day. Right? So we have to understand that our church embraces. Now, this was not always the case. I think some of us are old enough to remember when we were told, the only way you're going to get to heaven is if you're Catholic, right? The church does not say that. The church says that this is the surest pathway, the most direct pathway, if we believe the teachings of the early church and Jesus coming to establish this kingdom, this is it. He kind of gave us the keys, right? But it's not the only way. And in doing this, in saying we embrace these other traditions when they hold these truths, that we can have dialogue and we can learn from each other and we can love one another and we can be respectful, and it enhances the beauty of this other that we call God and spirituality. Is that making some sense? The thing that we will find, and this is why I am so convinced that there is a God. The thing that we're going to find is for hundreds and thousands of years, people have been seeking the truth of the same questions. Why are we here? What's our mission? What are we supposed to be doing? What happens after we die? And all of those questions have answers within the great religious traditions of the world, and they are all very much the same. That there is really only one thing that you arrive at in the end. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at these religious traditions, and my challenge to you is, what are we arriving at that is the same as my experience and as this Catholic experience that we live? Are we good? Any questions? Anybody online? We're good? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to move on then. And what we're going to do tonight, so I just put this little chart together. You can take a look at this. I can make this PowerPoint available to you if you're interested in it. But this just shows, for the traditions that we're looking at, kind of like the originations, the founding stories, the differences in names that we use, the great books that we use. So we'll get to talk about these things as we talk about the different traditions. Okay? All right, so here we go. Let's talk about Judaism. Anybody know anything about Judaism? What do you know about Judaism? Okay, so the Catholic faith is based on some level, on Judaism. These are our historical roots, and much of our ritual life is a reflection of our Jewish heritage. I put a little bit of words in there. Was that representing what you wanted to say? Okay. Anybody else? Yep. It can be a very legalistic religion. Okay. Anybody else? Exactly. Jesus Christ was a prophet, but not the Messiah. Anyone else?
It was the first religion to say there was one God.
First organized religious tradition that owned this idea of monotheism, that there is only one God. Some people debate that a little bit. Some people say it's Zoroastrianism, but Judaism is always given that attribute in the most general terms. Anything else? Oh, good. You don't know a whole bunch of good stuff. I was afraid you guys were going to tell me everything that was on the slideshow. So, all right. So, let's talk about this word, this person who is Jewish. This person who is Jewish. It's interesting to me. I find this very difficult sometimes to talk about, because when we talk about a Jewish individual, they're not necessarily a religious person. They're not Jewish necessarily because they believe in the religion of Judaism. They may be ethnically Jewish because their bloodline comes from the Jewish bloodline that stems from ancient Hebrew nomadic people. And this bloodline that is Jewish in the modern world is passed down through the mother. So if you have a Gentile father and a Jewish mother, you have a Jewish child. And if you have a Gentile mother and a Jewish father, you do not have a Jewish child. Now, in the modern world, and this is very much in the modern world, lots of times people just say, no, I'm half Jewish, right? But when you're talking about legalistically and religiously, the mother has to be Jewish for the child to be Jewish, okay? Lots of reasons for this throughout history, but that's the way it stands today. So a person can be Jewish, and they can be non-religious, and they can be Jewish because they converted to Judaism and they don't have Jewish blood, or they can be both. Jewish by heritage, bloodline, culture, Jewish by religious tradition. So what happens with this is a lot of times people make assumptions about Jewish people. So you're Jewish, so you must be X, Y, and Z. And those assumptions can be wrong because they might not practice their faith at all, or they might not have been raised in a faith, okay? Or they may have converted to another faith, but they're still Jewish by blood. So just so we're aware that these are can be two very distinctly different things, right? And when we look at the different sects of Judaism, you'll see some of them are not actually religious, that when people call themselves certain names, they are actually talking about a political stance in the world. Now, we are not going to do any history, which we spent some time on last time, but time gets away when we try to do too much, right? So I took all of that out of there. But the history of Judaism is quite important. It's very informative for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So if there's any point where we're talking about something that needs some clarification, we can revisit that a little bit. But we are not going to stay with that tonight, okay? The history does span thousands of years. I'm just going to give you the quickest, 1 minute here. And as somebody said, it was considered to be the first monotheistic religion in the world. Established purportedly by Abraham, who we meet in the Old Testament. Abraham is considered the father of monotheistic religions because from Judaism stems Christianity in the 1st century and Islam in the 7th century. Okay? Now, how those both stem from Judaism, we can talk about now, or we could talk about when we do Islam. So do you want me to kind of do a real brief now on how those three branches come to be? Okay. Abraham's the father of a great nation called by God to go to this promised land, the land of Canaan. He obeys God, he goes, he establishes himself in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is what we would call today modern-day Israel, the little sliver of land along the Mediterranean Sea that is south of Jordan and south of Russia, that whole area there, right? And just northeast of Egypt and the whole African peninsula. He goes to this land, the promised land given to him. He is given this promise, which we recount in the Old Testament over and over and over. You will be the father of a great nation. This land is yours and your descendants for all eternity. Your descendants will be as numerous as stars. Well, his wife can't get pregnant. We hear this reading every year at the Easter Vigil, right? His wife can't get pregnant. They're elderly. I forget how old he is. She's 99, no babies. And he keeps saying to God, what's the what, dude? You tell me I'm going to be the father of this great nation, and my descendants are as numerous as the stars, and we have no children. And so, as is traditional in the ancient world, Sarah has to provide for her husband a surrogate to bear children. The surrogate will sleep with Abraham. If she becomes impregnated, those children are considered his and Sarah's children. So they are legit children birthed by another woman. So he sleeps with Sarah's maidservant named Hagar, and they have a child named Ishmael. And then, lo and behold, Sarah becomes pregnant with Abraham's child at this old age of 99, and they give birth to a child named Isaac. Okay? All kinds of drama. The Old Testament is so wonderful. It's so full of drama. It's the best stuff on the planet. And so there's all this drama. Upshot of it is Hagar, the maidservant, and Ishmael are like sent away because Sarah's jealous. And when they're sent away, an angel visits Sarah and Ishmael in the desert and says to Sarah, your children will be given this great land, and your children will be as numerous as the stars, and blah, this kind of very similar kind of promise that God gave to Abraham. Okay, now keep in mind, Ishmael is Abraham's firstborn son, Isaac is his secondborn son. Ishmael falls out of favor. They're gone. There's some point in Genesis where they just fall off the pages of the book. The descendancy of Judaism then goes from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Israel to the 12 tribes and then on, and then eventually those descendants become the forebearers of the family of the kingship of David, which is where Christ comes from, right? So Christianity falls from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jesus is from the house of David, and that's where we get who Jesus is in the founding of Christianity. Islam claims that they are descendants, and they will accept a vast portion of the Old Testament. They believe in Adam and Eve. They believe Abraham is their father of their nation. But their descendancy will go from Abraham to Ishmael. And that's where the nation of Islam comes from. Not the nation of Islam, the religion of Islam comes from. And the reason that there is this constant battle for the promised land is because the Jewish nation, the Jewish people will say, God promised us this land, this is our rightful land. And Muslims will say, but God promised it to us too, and Ishmael was Abraham's rightful first son, and he rightfully inherited the promised land, not Isaac. And so all of our modern politics that we deal with today, and all of this religious tension that we deal with within these two religious traditions, literally stem from our birth story, which is that Abraham is the father of a great nation, and his descendants will be as numerous as stars. So that's how that kind of all unfolds, okay? So we'll look a little bit more at that when we look at Islam. Does anybody have any questions about that? It is, yes. Their stories are found in the Quran. They make reference to Adam and Eve. They make reference to Abraham. He is this great figure in their history as well. We'll talk about more when we do Islam, because then there's this whole thing about why did Muhammad come and how that whole religion establishes itself in the known world, okay? Any other questions? Yes?
I just want to back up to you when you were talking about the bloodline, ethnic.
Yes, ethnicity?
Yeah. So if you're from Argentina, you're an Argentinian, right? You're from Mexico, you're Mexican. So you're saying that Jews are an ethnic group. So is there
A homeland?
a home?
So this land that I talked about, the land of Canaan, throughout history has had many names. It's been known as Canaan. It's been known as Judah. It's been known as Palestine. It's been known as Israel, currently known as Israel. But when it was known as Judah, that's where the word Jew comes from. Okay? And so these formerly nomadic people who came together and landed in this land and eventually became in, I want to say, and this is not exact, so don't ever quote me on this, maybe the 7th, 6th century BCE, before Christ, before Common Era, when the land became known as Judah, because as the land was occupied over and over and over and over and over and over and over throughout history, when whoever was occupying it changed something about it. And so that idea of Judah comes from, that's where the Jewish name comes from. And of course, throughout all of these multiple occupations throughout the history of the Jewish people, they have been displaced over and over and over again. They have been spread throughout the whole world. So you'll find Argentinian Jews, right, with Jewish blood that they can trace back to Jewish ancestors, but they are in fact now born in Argentina. So, there's all kind of mixing and matching going on here. Does that help a little bit? It's kind of convoluted. Their history is pretty crazy.
Now I have another question about that same, slide. You're talking about that Judaism comes from the mother. So I have a girlfriend whose daughter converted to Judaism to marry a Jew, and then now her children would be considered Jewish because she changed from Catholicism to Judaism.
Okay, so religiously, now as far as the bloodline is concerned, a purist might say, and I'm not going to say this because I don't know the absolute answer, I'll try to find out for you. A purist might say that they are not Jewish because they're not racially Jewish. They are only considered to be a practitioner of the religion of Judaism. But I'll try to find that out for you. Okay? Anything else? Good? Okay. So let's talk about the different sects in Judaism. So somebody said that Judaism is very legalistic, okay? And that is very true, but not for all sects of Judaism. Now, keep in mind at this point, right now, I am talking about the practice of the religion of Judaism. So we're talking about sects within the practice of Judaism. And what we find in Judaism is what we find in all religious traditions, but Judaism is brilliant because Judaism owns the spectrum of how religious how their religious practices will be played out in their lives, how formal they will be or how liberal they will be, and every place in between. And so that's why we see different sects, S-E-C-T-S, within Judaism, because there are adherents to the religion that are very, very faithful to every single practice. And then there are adherents to the religion that are the Catholics who go to church on Easter and Christmas, right? And everything in between. But again, they can find a temple or a synagogue that suits their preference by knowing what sect they want to participate in. Now, we could do that in Catholicism because we got people all over the board too. Everybody does, right? Every religious tradition has people all over the place. But we don't name it like that. We say, no, we're one church, we're universal. We don't separate out how serious or not serious we are about our ritual practices, okay? So the first sect within Judaism we want to talk about is Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Judaism is the strictest practice of religious ritual. Orthodox Judaism will adhere very, very closely to every rule, every guideline, every regulation that they have, and they find these rules and regulations and guidelines in the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Now, Jews do not call the section of the Bible that we call the Old Testament, they don't call it the Old Testament. It is their only testament. Okay? So the Hebrew scriptures that we refer to as the Old Testament is their only testament. I just call it that because I'm such in a habit of calling it that because I'm Catholic. It's kind of disrespectful to them because it makes it sound like, their testament is really no longer valid and the new one is really the most valid of it. That's what Christians do believe, like the Old Testament leads us to, and we fulfill the Old Testament, but it's not as essential to our understanding of God as the New Testament is, okay? So I will try to remember to call it the Hebrew texts, okay? They have a name for it. They call it the Tanakh, okay? So the Torah is the first 5 books of that testament. The Hebrew Testament is not ordered exactly the same way as a Christian or a Catholic Old Testament is. And it doesn't have the exact same books that a Catholic Old Testament has. It has fewer books than the Catholic Old Testament. And that's also for historical reasons. The books that they do have, okay, the first 5, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are the single most important sacred texts within Judaism. And these texts are called the Torah or the Pentateuch. And within those texts, how many of you have ever read the book of Numbers or Deuteronomy from cover to cover? And what do you find when you read that? It can be very boring because what is it, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it about? Numbers, census, ancestry, the wanderings in the desert, and a lot of laws, right? So these rules and regulations that we find in these early books, starting with the 10 Commandments given to Moses, these rules and guidelines that we see when we read these books of our testament are very specific, right? And they're so specific that there are things like, you're not allowed to eat shellfish. You cannot eat the meat of an animal with a cloven hoof, right? So they're very, very specific. An Orthodox Jew will do everything in their power to follow every single regulation set forth in the Torah. They are going to be exceptionally legalistic, as somebody said. In an Orthodox synagogue, women would not be permitted to sit with men. Typically, women sit in the back and men sit in the front. Women would not be permitted to sit for what is called a quorum, which is that you have to have a certain number of men to make a prayer valid to God. They would not be allowed to sit, I'm going to say this word wrong because I have another word in my head. Shiva. I was going to say Shiva, like the god, because I have the Hindu god in my head. They would not be permitted to sit to mourn because they're a woman. So there are very specific rules and guidelines that are followed in the Orthodox tradition. Okay? Now, let's take that one step further. And within the Orthodox tradition itself, we have a group of Jewish that call themselves Hasidim, the Hasidic Jews. The Hasidic Jews are even more legalistic, more ritualistic, more very specific types of behavior than even a practicing Orthodox Jew. The Hasidim are very much about we are our community and we are our community alone, and do not engage outside of a Hasidic community. If a Hasidic couple breaks up and they get a legal divorce, the Hasidic couple is not considered divorced until the man grants what is called a get, G-E-T, where the man says, I divorce you. And if he doesn't say that, the woman is never free to remarry in that community again. And the man is not either, but if the man wants to get married, he can just grant the get. So he could just say it when he's ready to say it. Okay, there's this whole thing, I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, it's called a chained wife. And it comes from this practice of Hasidic men who will not release their wives from a religious marriage, even if they have a civil divorce. Okay? So there's all kinds of things about Hasidim that are very what some, and I am not making any judgments. I am simply saying some would consider very extreme and to the most fundamental degree of interpretation of a religious tradition that you can be. They will not, they cannot drive on the Sabbath. They walk everywhere. No, we have a Orthodox temple in Ormond Beach, and the Hasidim have bought homes in the community by the temple so that they can walk there because they can't drive there. And they are often very clearly identified by their clothing, by their side curls, beards, right? They walk ahead of their wives. The women would not walk with them in public. And this is all very much from the ancient world, and they believe that in adhering to all of these rules and guidelines, this is how they are relating to God. That God is found in this law. And again, this goes back to much of the history of Judaism, when the Ten Commandments were presented to Moses and the Ten Commandments were put into the Ark of the Covenant. They believed that that ark was where God dwelled. God dwells in the law. We adhere to the law, and this brings about freedom. I now am free to live this unobstructed life in God's grace because I know exactly what God expects me to do. And in living this life of the law, I am as close to God as I can possibly be on earth. Okay? Now, fundamentalism can get out of control, obviously, as everything can, when the adherence to the law becomes so important that we forget. It's kind of like let's just use the most well-known example, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Why did the priest and Levite walk by the man who's beaten up on the road? Does anybody know? He's unclean because he's bleeding and they can't touch him. And if they touch the blood, now they're ritually unclean. And if they're ritually unclean, they can't go into their temple and they can't do their religious rituals. So we would rather let this man lay on the side of the road and bleed to death than for me to become unclean and not be able to do the ritual. That becomes problematic. And sometimes we will see these extreme cases in Hasidic Judaism where that's exactly what happens. But there are extremes in every religious tradition. Okay? So the Hasidim, part of Orthodox, considered to be the most pious of all Jews, okay, and live in very close quarters and close community. All right, any questions about that? Yep.
What do they think will happen if they break one of the rules?
They will not be in right relationship with God. There's debate within Judaism, on all the spectrum of Judaism, what happens when you die. There are Jews that will say there is no heaven, there's no hell, there's no afterlife. And that is a very common belief within Judaism, that it's this earth, and that we, on this earth, serving God is our only job. There's no reward for it. It's just what's expected of us. And when we don't do that, that's why we have Jewish, the seasonal holidays like Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, because we have to atone for when we don't do this right. So that's basically would be a thing that they would need to atone for, because they're somehow not living a righteous life if they're breaking these rules. Okay? Anyone else? Yep. Yeah, yeah. So she was obviously not Orthodox, so she wouldn't have been allowed to sit Shiva with, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, yeah. Yes? Oh, okay. Ask Moses. Wow, we got a direct connection to the big man, huh? Okay, yeah. There are. I mean, even in the New Testament, when we read about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, we're literally reading the precursor to these religious sects that develop into the modern world. And there were debates. Some believed in angels, some didn't believe in angels. Some believed in, afterlife, some didn't believe in an afterlife. So it's kind of all over the place. And I honestly couldn't tell you who does or who doesn't. I do know that there's no absolute one answer when you talk about the whole spectrum of Judaism. Okay? Yes? Uh-huh. Yeah, so Carol's saying that she sees some of the Hasidic Jews and how much she admires their devotion. I will say to you that when I teach world religions, one of the questions I ask my students is, what is something that you admire about this religion that we just studied? And they always talk about how through all of the hardships that the Jewish people have endured in the world, they still remain faithful. And it is quite beautiful, really. It is really, really something to witness, the depth of many Jewish people's faith, and that kind of sense that, and it's a, I don't want to say simple, it's a way to live that just makes sense of the ebb and the flow of your day, because it's just there for you. Yeah. So there's some interesting shows on television now about Orthodox Jews that really give you a fascinating insight into how this tradition works, and the community within it is so powerful. It is lovely.
I think it's right to say that women can't sit Shiva. I think the
In Orthodox, go ahead.
I think they sit Shiva, they don't count.
They don't count as a quorum. Yes, thank you. You are right about that. They cannot be counted as part of the quorum, but they can be in the room. Yes, yes, thank you.
What about this Lubavitch sect on Grenada? Lubavitch.
That's Hassad.
That's
Is that what it's called? I don't know what it's called.
That's the American version of that.
Okay, all right. So that's part of the Hasidim then. Okay.
okay. So that's
The most strict adherence, yes. Okay? All right. So let's look at, I don't know why they're in this order. So let's, I think I put them in order of like when they kind of came into existence. Let's just go next to conservative Judaism. Conservative Judaism is what we're going to call the middle of the road. Okay? Conservative Judaism is very strict adherence. They're definitely going to abide by Torah regulations. They are definitely going to try to get to synagogue on the weekends, on the Sabbath. They are going to adhere to many of the dietary regulations of Judaism, but they are not as strict, nor are they as, I want to say the word obvious, as the Orthodox or Hasidic Jews are. Conservative Jews are just that, very conservative. They understand their faith. They practice it with great religiosity, but they also are more in the world and of the world than Orthodox Jews might be. Orthodox Jews might not even shop any place. They won't eat out in a restaurant because they don't know, there's no way to say that it's going to adhere by dietary regulations. Conservative Jews probably, but they might be a little bit more lenient with things like that. But very faithful practitioners of Judaism, but just a little bit more kind of middle of the road, okay? And then we have Reform Judaism. Now, Reform Judaism is kind of, I think it's fair to say it's a little bit of a reaction to circumstances. And why I say that is Reform Jews stem from a place that says this whole idea that we are completely set apart from everybody else, it hasn't been working for us. Like we keep getting, there's a lot of problems that our Jewish brothers and sisters have dealt with in the world and continue to deal with. And so Reform Jews would say, we have to live in this world. We have to be part of the culture. We have to engage in society in the fullest way possible. And so Reform Jews would say, we're religious, but it is not the thing that drives everything about us. We have friends that are not Jewish. We go to non-Jewish restaurants. We eat out. We live in society. We work for people who are not Jewish. We don't go to synagogue sometimes. Sometimes we just don't want to go, and we just don't go and pray together as a community. But when we're ready, we can go back, and it's no big deal. Reform Jews have women rabbis within their temple. So if you go to a rabbinical school, depends on what sect it is. Some women can become rabbis, other women can't become rabbis, depending on how strict. So it's much more progressive. It's much more we live as part of this world, but we still believe in our Jewish roots, our Jewish faith, our Jewish bloodline, and we still consider ourselves to be religious. Just a much more casual nod towards it than our Hasidic and Orthodox brothers and sisters. And again, we know people who are Catholic and who are not going to miss weekend mass if they're on their last breath, who are going to do every single possible thing they can. They're going to come to church and pray the rosary. The whole rhythm of their life surrounds their community of Catholicism. It's beautiful. And then we have people over here who are like, oh, maybe I'll go to Mass. I haven't been to Mass all year. It's Christmas. Let me go to Mass, right? So, we have them all over the place too. We just don't call them, oh, that's the sect of Easter and Christmas Catholics. So kind of keep it in that idea. We're talking about a spectrum here from extreme to progressive liberal and everything in between. But what they don't deny is their history, the faith. They just sometimes might be, well, you're not supposed to eat shellfish. We're not going to eat shellfish. And over here we might be like, but I like shrimp, so I'm going to go ahead and eat shellfish because that's a stupid old rule. Okay? So we got them all over, just like everybody else. Okay? Any questions about the sects, these religious sects of Judaism? I do not know that. I do not know that. I'm sorry. Okay, now what we're getting into here is we're getting into a more political bent, all tied to the history of Judaism, all tied all the way back to Abraham. But this has more to do with all of the different times the Jewish people were where others tried to set out to destroy the Jewish nation, stemming back to the first captivity. We can even say stemming back to Egypt, even though they weren't called Jews then, but then stemming back to the Assyrian captivity and the Babylonian exile, and all the way up to the modern world where we have the Holocaust and everything in between that happened in the history of Judaism, where they became targeted as a group, and oftentimes there were people who thought a genocide of the Jewish nation was the right thing to do. So what happens is we have political reaction, and Jews who are could be religious, I'm not saying they're not, but are also prone to be more political. We talk about them in terms of Reconstructionist Judaism, and what they're trying to do is say, we are culturally, this is where we get this idea of it's not just a religion, it is a culture, it is a bloodline. We have these deep roots embedded in certain parts of the world, but we don't have to be religious to be recognized as a nation. Reconstructionist Judaism starts to happen in the 1930s, big surprise, right? And then we have Zionism, and Zionism is considered kind of a way of talking about Jewish nationalism. And this is where we start to kind of get into these ideas of fighting against anti-Semitic hate, trying to reestablish the Jewish people in the homeland of Israel. And so this is very much a political movement, and still active in the world today, where Zionists are still trying in many ways to take back more and more of the promised land. So when we talk about the promised land, okay, up until the I can't say that because it's just been back and forth so many times, but in our recent history, that piece of land was known as Palestine. And in our recent history, it was occupied, and when I say occupied, it was inhabited, is a better word, by Arab people who were mostly Muslim, many Muslims, and they lived in that part of the world, and were established in their mind as the nation of Palestine. And then after World War II, as reparations to the Jewish nation because of what happened during World War II, the United Nations said, we're giving you back this land, and now it's going to be known as Israel. And so, of course, you can say that out loud, but you have to displace a whole nation of people who are living there. And this is all historical at the British Army, and then the British Army said, well, we're going to leave now, and we're going to let you kill each other, and all this history that happens. But ultimately then, after this happens, there are wars kind of back and forth, because Jerusalem was always this crazy. The upshot of all of this is, in the modern world today, Israel is the Jewish nation, the Jewish homeland. This is what the Zionists are fighting for. But there are territories attached to Israel known as Palestinian territories, where the Palestinians were put after this revival of Israel, one known as the West Bank and one known as the Gaza Strip. Today, Zionists are still pushing to encroach on this land that is now occupied by Palestinians who are trying to get somebody to recognize them as a nation. And so there's all of this political hotbed still happening, but again, some Jews would say they are the rightful heirs to this land. They have been destroyed throughout all of history. Anti-Semitism has tried to wipe out this nation, and they have the rightful, they are rightfully trying to reclaim what is theirs, even at the demise of the Palestinians. So Zionism can, again, become extreme in the sense that it's tunnel vision. You almost can't blame these people, but it can be tunnel vision, right? And it can be at the demise of other human beings who are now being encroached upon because this is where they live. So it's just fascinating how religion and politics are so intertwined with each other. I mean, we know that from the history of Catholicism, how the world is kind of very reliant upon religion in many ways for the way that we have. It doesn't seem to be a good idea, does it? But I think it's inevitable. It's impossible to separate at this point in time. So, all right, so let's talk about the sacred text. I think I mentioned this to you. When we talk about the Tanakh, we know this is the Old Testament. The Tanakh is this acronym for the Hebrew words for the Torah. So the Torah, for the whole Bible, pardon me. The Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. So the Torah is the first 5 books. The Nevi'im is the books of the prophets. And then the writings are known as the Ketuvim. The writings would be books like 1st and 2nd Samuel, the book of Psalms. They do classify their books a little differently than we would classify them if you would look at how we classify books of the Hebrew texts. And so you take these letters, T, N, and K, and you get what they would say as the Tanakh. And that's how they make reference to what their sacred scriptures are. Okay? They have, 39 books are found in the Hebrew texts. Now, in the Catholic Church, we would say that there are 7 additional texts that belong to the Hebrew Bible. But they would dispute that, and that's another whole long story. So we can go into it if you want to. Protestants do not, because Protestants during the Reformation rejected the Catholic and went back and said the Jews are the originals, and so they have the right thinking, that Catholics don't have the right thinking anymore. They said that about a lot of stuff with church, but that's why we had a Reformation, okay? All right, so I think I may have just been rambling on and already mentioned this. Very strict Jews believe Moses wrote the whole Torah. They believe Moses was the author of the Torah. Now, scripture scholarship, modern scripture scholarship, would say that that's an impossibility because there are so many different authors that we can identify in the Hebrew texts. But a very strict Jew would say, that's crazy. Moses wrote them all and handed them to us. And that's their belief system, and that's fine if that's what they believe, because they don't really care too much about modern scripture scholarship, where we start to parse apart. You guys hear it every week during your homily. So what they say is in the Torah, there are 613 laws, and there are also 613 words in the Ten Commandments. And so these laws are the 613 laws that they need to follow. So there's 248 positive and 365 negative laws. They can't possibly observe them all because, for example, the temple no longer exists, the great temple of Israel. It was torn down in the year 70 by the Roman Empire. The only part that remains is the Western Wall, which we know as the Wailing Wall. So some of the laws are about temple practices. So obviously they can't do those. But the ritual practices, the dietary regulations, they do all of it. As much as humanly possible to do it, they do it. You know, you don't work on the Sabbath, so you have to figure out what you're going to do for your food, how you're going to feed your animals. There might be certain things that you can or cannot do depending on the circumstances. If you got an animal that's going to eat every bit of food, or you don't have a special dispenser for your animal, maybe you have to feed them on the Sabbath, but you would only do that out of absolute necessity because you just don't do it. So they try to honor. Now, again, Reform Jews would say that this is impossible, especially if you're trying to get up and go to work in the morning and you're trying to, and we're living in the world and we are of the world more than perhaps some of our Orthodox brothers and sisters. So basically what they say is that the Ten Commandments are like the perfect laws, and that inherent within the Ten Commandments are the other 613 rules. So like when you have dietary regulations, they would say that refers back to which commandment? Do you know? No, because they do eat animals. They would say that would go back to honoring God. Okay? Because we honor God by the way we live our lives. And so by living our lives in the purest way possible, we are now living out that commandment. Okay? So that's what their belief is. And they do believe that this brings about perfect freedom. So we've done all this. So one of the most interesting things, I think, within Judaism is the way that they, the texts of their sacred writings, they still have them on scrolls, okay? So, of course, in the ancient world, when the Hebrew texts were written, they were written on parchment, and they were put on scrolls, and they were transported around like that. When you go to a synagogue, they will have a tabernacle, but the tabernacle does not have the body of Christ in it. It has their sacred texts in it. Because again, they believe that these words, these laws, this is God incarnate for them. It is an identical similarity to what we believe about the tabernacle. God lives in the word of the Torah and of the scrolls. We believe Christ lives in the host in the tabernacle, right? And it is an exact understanding. So they would keep these on decorated and dressed scrolls, and they would be written in Hebrew. Now, they wouldn't ever touch them with their fingers. They would only touch them with a pointer. So this is a very, very, very simplistic scroll that you're seeing up on the screen now. Very simplistic. There are some synagogues that would say that their scrolls, they claim that they are some of the oldest scrolls found in the world, some synagogues in the United States, and that they were smuggled out of occupied countries like Poland and Germany during World War II, smuggled into the United States. So there are some synagogues in our country that claim to have some of the most dated scrolls. And when a group of Jews wants to build a temple in a community, one of the first things that they obtain are the scrolls of their sacred writings, because God dwells here, and now we can build this place in honor of God and have this place for these sacred texts. Okay? I love the idea of how significant words are in Judaism. I think we've lost some of that sense in the modern world, and about really how powerful words are. And you look in the Hebrew texts, and God creates the world with his words, right? We know that that is an analogy for creation, but nonetheless, it like speaking creation into existence. Jesus Christ, we call Jesus in John's gospel the Logos, right? The Word of God. And they haven't lost this sense of sacredness that I think it's easy to lose in the modern world. So I think that's one of the most beautiful things about Judaism. So this is an ark, okay? And the ark is going to be on the wall that faces Jerusalem. So it's going to depend on how the synagogue is built as to what wall the ark would be on. And they would have the scrolls. Usually it's 3 sets of scrolls for each part of the Bible, but they're quite large. So sometimes they would take the prophetic books and they would break them up into smaller scrolls. So it all depends on what is within the temple there. But that's how we get, if you know anything about the prophetic books, we talk about major prophets and minor prophets. And that distinction comes because the major prophets are the long-writing prophets, and they took a whole scroll. This is in a very ancient world. They took a whole scroll, and the minor prophets were so short that you could put all of the minor prophets on one scroll. So it's kind of like, again, we inherit this idea of where does this come from? Well, it comes from our ancient Jewish ancestry. All right? They also have some sacred texts which they refer to as the oral Torah. It's known as the Mishnah, okay? And basically what this is a way to help interpret the law when we are unsure of what the law is trying to tell us, okay? So for a perfect example, when they say you don't work on the Sabbath, well, that's pretty general, right? How do you define the word work? Is work feeding my cat, or is that not work? Is that an act of love, right? And so then what happens is you get the Mishnah, and the Mishnah, this ancient text also, trying to help define how do you live these out in the real acting out of your day-to-day life. And so then it would go into some explanation as to, well, what is considered work? What are you allowed to do or not do? And they also have a book called the Talmud, and the Talmud is a further commentary on the Mishnah. So there's never a last word in religion. In any religious tradition, there is never a final word because, look at the church. We got a catechism that's been how many times revised, And even Francis 3 years ago says, we're not revising it on paper, but I'm telling you right now, capital punishment is going in there because you can't do it. I don't care what the catechism says. There's never a last word. We're always rethinking, what does it mean to live this way in the world, okay? So great Jewish scholars would use, obviously, their sacred texts of the scriptures first and foremost, but then if there's any kind of rabbinical debate about what or what isn't, they would consult both the Mishnah and the Talmud to come to some conclusive decision about what we're really supposed to be doing, or what does this really look like in the world, okay? So then we have the most important prayer within Judaism is called the Shema. This is found in the book of Deuteronomy. This prayer should be familiar to us because we use this reading in our liturgical cycle. It's found, as I said, in Deuteronomy. It's, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is Lord alone." Here it is. "Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, with your whole being, with your whole strength. Take to heart these words which I command you today. Keep repeating them to your children. Recite them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them on your arms as a sign, and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. Write them on your doorposts of your houses and on your gates." Now, does that beginning, let's do the first 4 lines. Okay? Does that sound like anything that is contradictory to Catholicism? It's absolutely in keeping with what we believe about God, right? Absolutely within keeping. It's a beautiful prayer. Now, this is the cool thing. An Orthodox and some conservatives, and even some Reform, because I like the Reform people, because you know how, like, I got a daughter like this, raised Catholic, grew up in this church, doesn't go to Mass, but man, is she Catholic. You know, she gets her back up if something says something about Pope Francis she doesn't like. You know, she knows, I love Advent, Mom. Advent's starting. I'm like, oh, is that right, Hannah? You can go to Mass? No, I just like Advent so much, Mom. Even Reform Jews, you might do something like this, right? They love their history. We do. We hold on to it, right? We love it so much. We hold it close to us. It's what gives us life. But in this prayer, when it says, and this is a perfect example of Orthodox Judaism, bind them on your arm as a sign, and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. Write them on your doorposts of your houses and on your gates. They literally do this, okay? What you're seeing up at the top picture is called a mezuzah, okay? Now, again, this would not be uncommon to find in a Reform house, but in an Orthodox house, you're going to find it in every single doorway, outside and inside, okay? Now, what the little piece next to it is a scroll of the reading we just heard. In fact, I think I got a gift from you. Was it from the whole class? A gift from the class that has the beautiful scroll in it. It's a mezuzah that I have at my house. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that's right. You gave me this beautiful mezuzah. Okay, so you can see that in the 2 pictures on our left with the scroll. And then you see what are called phylacteries. So this is how we bind them on our foreheads and on our arms. Inside the box of the phylactery, we have the same similar type of a scroll. And you can see the gentleman who's dressed in his soldier. He's a Jewish soldier. He's got the binding all around his arm. They are literally, ritualistically living out this command found in Deuteronomy. Now, I do not know that there are many Reform Jews that would wear phylacteries. But I can assure you that if you look closely at those Orthodox Hasidic Jews walking to the temple on Sabbath in Ormond Beach, you might, now that you know, you might see them under their prayer shawls. You might see a little thing kind of coming out of their forehead, and that's where their phylactery is. Okay? It's very beautiful practice. All right? So here's what we're going to do. We are almost out of time. We're going to kind of jet through these holidays. I don't think any of this is going to really be out of the norm or something you haven't heard of. The first one is Rosh Hashanah. We just celebrated these in September, October. It's always in the fall, but it's not always the same date, okay? So Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. They celebrate the creation of Adam and Eve, the creation of all humanity, and this is when they will sound the shofar. This is obviously an old slide because I have the dates for 2019 on here. The shofar is a ram's horn. I think you have one here. Is it out anywhere? I know that we'd owned one. It's not out. It's a ram's horn, and it's kind of curly shaped, carved out, and they blow it, and it's kind of this kind of calling attention, this like listen, attention, like ringing bells. But they only blow the shofar on very specific religious occasions. So they would ring in the new year. It's really hard to blow. You have to like kind of be a good trumpet player to be able to get, yeah. And then we have Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is really considered to be the most sacred time of the year for our Jewish brothers and sisters. This is the Day of Atonement. This is the day where all Jews are called to make righteous with their brothers and sisters that they've hurt throughout the year. And not only should they pray for them, but they should talk to them. They should ask for apologies. They should apologize. They should make right. This is very much like what do you think that this puts you in mind of in Catholicism? Yes. I heard somebody saying something else. Lent, it's like a Lenten, and it's also like the sacrament of reconciliation, right? Yes. Okay. So, again, they blow the shofar, signifying that, that we need to give our attention to God. The Feast of Tabernacles is called Sukkot. So this is commemorating that the Jews had to wander in the desert for 40 years. What you will often see is Jews who are celebrating Sukkot. They will put up tents. I know that I have seen them in yards around Daytona. One time I was at a hotel during Sukkot, and somebody put up their tent on the balcony of their hotel room. Okay, and so this is the way that they remember the wanderings, and they will go in and they will pray in these tents. All right, we have Passover. Passover we're familiar with because we celebrate Passover every time we celebrate Mass, as Kathy said. The idea that God saved them from slavery and bondage and freed them from the Egyptians, ushered them out into the wilderness where they wandered and eventually ended up back into the promised land after hundreds of years of being gone. Okay? Shavuot. This is a remembering of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments in the desert. Again, very significant and important. And what they do is they kind of like rededicate themselves back to living a life that is reflected within the Torah. Hanukkah is an interesting one. Hanukkah is probably the most well-known of all Jewish holidays, and it's not really considered a religious holiday by most Jews. And there's a couple reasons. The first one is the books that the book of the Bible in which Hanukkah is recounted, which is in the book of Maccabees, is not part of the Hebrew texts. They don't accept that as a valid sacred text. So even though they recognize it exists, it's not part of their Bible, their Tanakh. And really, what scholars will tell you is that Hanukkah came into favor as a reaction against Christmas. And so we had a lot of Jewish children that wanted Santa Claus to bring them presents on Christmas Day. And of course, religious people know that that's a little bit of a, we've, kind of overtaken the real meaning of Christmas, but Jewish scholars are not naive to the fact that we're still celebrating the Messiah that we don't really believe in, right? And so then they said, we have a celebration. It's a celebration of light. It's about this freedom that we established in the temples. They believe that the Maccabees' revolt really happened, which is is what is being told in part of the book of Maccabees. They just don't recognize it as part of their Bible. So they understand that this did happen in the 3rd century BCE, and that this miracle happened, that they didn't have enough oil, and they were keeping the Greeks out of the temple who were worshiping false gods, and they were destroying the sacredness of it. And the Maccabean brothers revolted, and they protected the temple. And that's what Hanukkah commemorates. And so they have the menorah, and the menorah reminds them that there was this miracle that happened as they protected their sacred temple from the Greeks. And then every day, for 8 days, they get a gift. And so you can see how that counteracts this idea of Christmas and gift giving. Typical Jewish families will give like a pair of socks one day, but just like Christmas givers, it could go anywhere from a pair of socks to, a trip to Tahiti or something, because people get extreme with their gift giving. So, and so that's Hanukkah. They have Purim, which is the Feast of Lots. This is a celebration of Queen Esther, who she was the one that she was able to stop another slaughter of the Jews because she had procured some favor, and she was able to get the slaughter to not happen. And so they do all kinds of fun games where they honor Esther, and they play fun games with different toys that they have. And then we talk about the Jewish Sabbath, or Shabbat. And the Jewish Sabbath is it begins at sundown Friday and goes until sundown Saturday. And again, this is the holiest day of rest, where they do nothing but honor God for that 24-hour time period, oftentimes celebrating a family meal, lighting candles, and going to temple or synagogue to worship with their community. So the last bit of this, I think, again, this is probably nothing that is unusual to you, but coming of age rites. We have a bris that happens on the 8th day after a male baby is born, where we circumcise. The 8-day-year-old will be circumcised regardless if it is the Sabbath or not. This is the only thing that they will break Sabbath rest for, is rabbis will perform a bris if the baby is born, I guess what it would be this on a Thursday, then you would have to have the bris on a Saturday. Is that right? Or they're born on a Friday? I can't count. Whatever day they're born. They would have to, if the 8th day falls on the Sabbath, they would have to perform the bris. They do this in the synagogue. Rabbis are certified to perform this. It is a ritual. They believe that this marks them. It's a sacred tattoo that stems back to Abraham, where God told Abraham to circumcise his people, to mark them as separate and apart from the rest of the world. We have hijacked circumcision in the United States and turned it into a medical practice. Jewish babies that are born in a hospital will not Jewish boys will not get circumcised by a doctor. They will get circumcised by a rabbi. So that's the single most important thing that happens to a young man. For a girl, they will have a naming ceremony. And then finally, at age 12, a young girl will go through what is called a bat mitzvah. And a young boy at the age of 13 will go through a bar mitzvah, son and daughter of the law, where they are now considered adults within the Jewish community. And as adults, they take on the responsibility to practice the religious rituals and communal practices of their family and their Jewish community. Again, what does this put you in mind of in the Catholic Church? Confirmation. Confirmation. It's very easy to make parallel connections to things that we do. You know, we talk about the tabernacle, and we talk about, you know, even the circumcision and the naming ceremonies. We can equate that to a baptism rite. So we have these very similar things because religion throughout the world has found we have a need to express our understanding of God in very similar ways. So that's where we started, so that's kind of where we're going to end then. Do you really want me to say why the different? I'll end it with this. Why the different ages? Because girls are much more mature than boys. We know. So again, this is so fascinating because, you know, this has been around forever, and brain development hasn't been around. Like, understanding of brain development hasn't been around forever. So the truth, the revelation of this truth that women mature faster than men is really something people have known throughout the ages, but now we have evidence of what's happening in the prefrontal cortex of our brains, and the truth of it is that women's form faster than men, and that is the mature part of our brain that says we are acting in more mature, we're making better decisions, we're not as impulsive. And so we've known this. Well, why are girls more mature than boys? We didn't know why. Now we know why. But that has been revealed throughout the ages. So casting no aspersions on men. It's a fact of science. All right, we're over our time, so we're going to end. So if you think of any questions, let me know. I don't know if this is available right now. Is this available that you can email to them, or the slideshow? Yeah. Well, how about let's do this. Let's go back to the very first slide. My email is up there. If you would like a copy of this slideshow, send me an email to that email address that's up there. It's mgallo, like the wine, hyphen, Lethcoe, at fatherlopez.org. If you want to take a picture of that, if that makes it easier for you. If you email me, I will send you a copy of the slideshow. There's actually a couple things in there that I would encourage you to do. If you look at the slide with the Shema, there's a link there. Click on the link, and there's somebody who teaches you how to say it in Hebrew. It's so wonderful. It is wonderful. So that's a little fun thing, and there might be a couple other little eggs in there, but I'm not really sure. Okay? If you think of questions, you can email me questions, and I'm happy to do some research for you. Next week when we come back, we will look at Islam. All right?
How do you get on the link for the internet? Zoom, like you said, this is.
I don't know. I'm sorry. Is that in the bulletin? Does anybody know where the link or is it just to go on the Facebook page? Go on Our Lady of Lourdes Facebook. So if you'd rather sit at home and do this, just go on Facebook and you'll find it. Okay? YouTube and Our Lady of Lourdes page. And if those of you who are at home would like to come back, we'd love to see you in person. If you're comfortable being here, there's lots of space. So that's completely your call. Okay, very good. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Blessings.